On the morning of January 22, 1954, a lone fishing trawler sailed out of Yaizu Harbor in central Japan. Its destination, the rich fishing grounds of the Northwest Pacific. For the 23 hard-working men aboard, a bountiful catch of tuna could mean the difference between a season of plenty for themselves and their families or yet another lean spring. As if to beckon the favor of the gods, the ship had been named the Daigo Fukuryu Maru, meaning Lucky Dragon number 5. Lucky it would not be. By 1954, the Cold War was in full swing. Both the United States and the Soviet Union now possessed the hydrogen bomb. This megaweapon packed a destructive punch far more powerful than the atomic bomb, which had leveled the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki just 9 years earlier. Testing grounds for the U.S. nuclear program lay, ironically, right on Japan's doorstep, in the Marshall Islands, turning a lonely atoll named Bikini into a household name. On March 1, 1954, at 6:45 in the morning, crew members of the Lucky Dragon witnessed a sight they would never forget. The western horizon lit up in flame as if the sun had risen in the wrong part of the sky. 8 minutes later, a thunderous boom again coming from the west, the direction of Bikini Island. Later still, whitish-gray cinders began to rain down from the sky. As the alarmed fishermen pulled in their nets to leave the area, the ash coated the deck of the ship so thickly that some of the men began scooping it into bags with their bare hands. There was no getting it out of one's hair or off one's skin. The strange substance, a mixture of pulverized coral and lethal radioactive isotopes, would receive a chilling name in the Japanese press. They called it shinohai, death ash. What the men of the Lucky Dragon had witnessed without knowing it at the time was the most powerful nuclear explosion that the United States has set off till this very day, the 5th largest set off by any country. Codenamed Castle Bravo, the gigantic blast was one in a series of tests aimed at developing a new generation of hydrogen bombs. Unleashing 15 megatons of destructive energy, Castle Bravo turned out to be nearly 3 times more powerful than experts had predicted, enough to flatten 1,000 Hiroshimas or Nagasakis. To make matters worse, changing wind patterns drove the resulting fallout far beyond the perimeter of the testing area. The Lucky Dragon had been fishing outside the danger zone that U.S. military authorities had officially declared. But that was hardly a consolation to its frightened crew members. As the days went by, the men of the Lucky Dragon grew sicker and sicker. Back in port, they received medical attention and were soon hospitalized. There was no mistaking the symptoms of acute radiation poisoning. 7 months after being exposed to the death ash, one of the weakened crewmen finally passed away, becoming, as the media in Japan described it, the first human casualty of the h-bom. The victim was Aikichi Kuboyama, the ship's radio operator. 40 years old, Kuboyama left behind a desolated wife and 3 young daughters. His radiation-burned face would be immortalized by the American artist Ben Shawn, who devoted a series of moving ink paintings to Kuboyama, his fellow crew members, and the Lucky Dragon saga. Beyond the personal tragedies involved, the Lucky Dragon incident made a wider mark on Cold War politics and culture. It strained U.S.-Japanese relations for a time, endangering one of Washington's key alliances in the volatile East Asian region and creating a PR disaster for the United States globally. Many people in Japan accused the U.S. of having rained atomic destruction on their countrymen for a 3rd time, much as it had done at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Others claimed that Washington was treating the exposed fishermen as guinea pigs, harvesting their medical data in preparation for future nuclear war. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, some American officials expressed their suspicion that the Lucky Dragon had been deliberately sent to spy on military secrets, or at least had been fishing inside the exclusion zone. The diplomatic impasse eased when Washington agreed to pay $2 million in compensation to the Lucky Dragon's crew members, even as it refused to accept the official blame for what had occurred. But it was among ordinary people, not governments, that the Lucky Dragon incident made its most lasting mark. It gave birth in Japan to a citizen-based movement in opposition to nuclear weapons, with petition signatures collected from an astonishing 1/3 of the nation's population. This kind of grassroots activism would subsequently spread around the world. Unfortunately, so would nuclear weapons themselves. Since the March 2011 Fukushima disaster, Japan has once again become a flashpoint in global debates over nuclear technology. Back in the 50s, the Lucky Dragon incident triggered a major shift in public perceptions of nuclear danger, both inside and outside Japan. Prior to 1954, it was the sheer physical force of the bomb that most people worried about, its ability to devastate entire cities literally in a flash. The fate of the Lucky Dragon turned the spotlight instead on the lingering effects of radiation, or to use a term people started hearing more of around this time, the fallout. All the more disquieting for being invisible, this form of nuclear danger struck frighteningly close to home. For many months after the Castle Bravo blast, fish caught in the Western Pacific showed high levels of radiation, and after being Geiger tested, much of the catch had to be thrown away. Consumers stopped eating fish, prices fell, importers canceled contracts, and fishermen saw their livelihoods, if not their lives, endangered. Echoes of the events pervade the classic film Gojira, or Godzilla, conceived and produced during the same months of 1954. In one of its scenes, a character refers explicitly to, quote, atomic tuna. As others have noted, the making of that film can itself be seen as part of the fallout from the Lucky Dragon incident. In cinema, the specter of the Lucky Dragon would raise its head many more times during the late 1950s and early 60s. Godzilla, of course, birthed an entire genre, the kaiju eiga, or Japanese giant monster movie. The Lucky Dragon would be resurrected in other Japanese films as well, whether as the ghost ship of 1958's The H-Man from Toho Studios, or the title craft of Lucky Dragon No. 5, a docudrama made the following year by Hiroshima-born director Kaneto Shindo. More broadly speaking, the underlying theme of unintended exposure to radiation with dire consequences provided a much recycled plot premise for Cold War filmmakers the world over. To give a prominent Hollywood example, the title character of 1957's The Amazing Colossal Man enters a restricted military area where exposure to a nuclear weapons test causes him to grow gigantic. His doppelganger in The Incredible Shrinking Man from the same year starts shrinking in the wake of an innocent boat outing, during which both he and his vessel become enveloped in a mysterious radioactive mist eerily reminiscent of the Lucky Dragon's death ash. A more literal reminder of the Lucky Dragon No. 5 stands in this park just east of downtown Tokyo. After being abandoned in a nearby landfill in the late 60s, the original craft was preserved and now finds its home in this exhibition hall, visited yearly by thousands of schoolchildren as well as members of the general public. No longer radioactive, the battered hull of the boat bears witness still to the powerful tides of Cold War history and politics. The Lucky Dragon sails no more, but its empty decks convey a solemn, if silent, warning to future generations.